On June 28, 1862, the first train in Minnesota steamed out of Lowertown, St. Paul, riding the only rails in the state. It was barely a 10-mile journey to the end of the line near St. Anthony Falls, but from that moment, St. Paul was a railroad town and claimed the title Gateway to the West. By the late 1870s, Minnesota boasted over 3,000 miles of track, while in St. Paul, tons of freight and thousands of passengers each day were carried by 9 separate railroads.
But they were all using different stations. And the need arose for some kind of union station facility that could be shared by all the railroads. So the principal railroads formed a union depot company around 1879, 1880, and then constructed what was then the first union depot building in St. Paul, and it opened, I believe, in 1881. 2 years later, it was destroyed in a fire. It was rebuilt in 1884 and served continuously until 1913. In the interim, the needs of the railroads far outgrew the capacity of the depot, and it became pretty obvious that improvements were needed on the site.
So they started planning for what that third depot would be. They located the area it would be in, and they actually started to lay out tracks, figured they didn't have enough room. They had proposed to move the Mississippi River 300 feet south. They were ready to start working on that. And then there was a fire in the second building.
The fire destroyed the head house, but the train shed and tracks survived. Most depot operations moved to temporary quarters, and the trains kept on rolling. Planning for a new depot had been ongoing since 1905, but little progress had been made. It was difficult for the fiercely independent rail companies to reach agreement when their expectations for the new depot varied widely. The fire left them no option but to act.
The final plans were completed about 1917, and construction got underway during the First World War.
They were able to build this place while it was serving about 200 trains a day, which I think must have been an incredible undertaking from a coordination standpoint.
They built the waiting room in phases as they went. There was a last phase planned that didn't happen, because as this thing was completed, it was not only the peak of rail, it was the start of the decline of rail.
There were barely 200 automobiles in the whole state of Minnesota around the turn of the century when the planning for this depot got underway. Unfortunately for the railroad passenger service and railroad depots, the importance of the automobile and access to the automobile rose in those intermediate years.
So as this thing was built and started operating, you went from 18.5 million to 2 years later, 8 million people moving through here. We had our first airport terminal built in Twin Cities. We had car boulevards being built, and in 29 you had the stock market crash and the Depression. So, quickly went from high point to low point.
There was an increase during World War II in response to gasoline shortages, the unavailability of automobiles, tires, similar things. But after 1950, the decline resumed once again, continuing unabated through the 1950s and 1960s, until passenger service for every railroad in the country just became too much of a burden. And ultimately, it had to be turned over to the government because the railroads couldn't sustain them out of their own pocket. May 1, 1971 happened to be Amtrak Day. And when that day came along, most of the then intercity trains in the U.S. disappeared, and St. Paul Union Depot closed.